Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Peter Burton. I'm the literary coordinator of CMP Fall. I'd like to welcome you all this afternoon to the first of today's literary events. That's Rose Collis speaking about her edition of the new Encyclopedia of Brighton, a vastly improved and vastly expanded version of a book originally published more than 20 years ago by a man called Tim Corder. Rose seems to have done an enormous amount of work on this book. I was flicking through my copy at home before we came out thinking, goodness gracious, I've been here for 30 odd years, she hasn't, she knows far more than me. Damn! Rose has also achieved an enviable reputation as a biographer of a whole galère of eccentrics, including the writer and broadcaster Nancy Spain, the absolutely fabulous actress Coral Brown, who remains the most glamorous woman I think I've ever met, and Colonel Barker, I think Rose herself has described as a man-woman because she passed as a man for many years, in between times making regular appearances in such likely places as the News of the World and the Circus. Anyway, enough of my meanderings. I'd like to introduce Rose Collis.
Good afternoon, thank you very much, Peter. You might notice I have an homage to our literary programmer today. Very rare edition Peter Burton t-shirt, which was made in honour of his 50th birthday, which was a couple of years ago. Could I just, a little bit of housekeeping, could I please ask you to switch your mobile phones off if they are indeed still on? A few rummages in the bags, they're excellent. I will take comments and questions at the end of my talk and readings, so if you could wait until then, and we'll be doing those afterwards. And I will be giving this talk, according to the Argus, with Girl Guide leader gusto. I have to say, I was only the Girl Guide for 5 minutes, and I didn't wiggle anybody's wobble. So there we go. It's been 20 years since the original encyclopedia was published, written by Tim Corder, and it became a much used and much treasured reference book about the history of Brighton, mostly the architectural history. And there will probably be some people, but hopefully nobody here today, who think that any new edition should keep exactly the same content, the same format, the same tone. Although I would hope that at least they would welcome the introduction of page numbers. But, you know, the real world doesn't work like that, and our society and culture evolves and develops and changes, and quite rightly, our media reflects that. And it is remarkable to think just what has happened to this city, as it now is, in the last 20 years, because it has become a city. It's become a unitary authority, shotgun wedding to home, which I think some Hove writers aren't too happy about, still. Its football club became a team without a permanent home. We've lost one pier, well, we've gained a university, and a new central library, just 100 years after it was first mooted. And we have a completely different Churchill Square, just those of you who didn't live here before may not realise that, and we have the country's biggest free pride event. What hasn't happened? Well, several major seafront developments have run aground for various reasons. Brighton and Hove did not become a European city of culture. It gave the thumbs down to having an elected mayor, and irrefutably and mercifully has not become London by sea. This is a born and bred Londoner. Trust me, if it was, I wouldn't be here. You know, Brighton's always made history, always, and it continues to do so. I mean, the book, lovely Robert Nemeth in the later said he was impressed with how up-to-date the book was. And obviously with new technology, I was able to add things and do things right up until we went to press. Because history was being made, as I say, as I wrote it, because Brighton Pavilion, it was going to make history, it made history anyway, because, I don't know if you know, you'll know that it elected the first Green MP in Britain, Caroline Lucas, but what you may not know is it already made history, because it was the first time ever in a British election where the four candidates for the four main parties had all been women. Labour, Tory, Green, Lib Dem. So we were doing it. You know, we can't stop making history in this town. It's quite amazing. So there were 200, just a little bit of facts and figures because I know people like this. There were 206 sections in the 1990 edition. This one has nearly 400. The images are up from 195 in 1990 to 325 in the new one, and they're entirely new. There isn't a single image that was in the original one that is in this one. Lots of black and white photographs, illustrations and maps from private and public collections, and all the new black and white digital photographs I had the great pleasure of taking and editing. People have said to me, what was one of your biggest problems with this book? And I said, white vans in front of historic buildings, driving up the wall, and big wheelie bins as well. I wouldn't believe how many times there was a big wheelie bin stuck in front of something or a white van. So if you saw a mad woman with a camera sort of standing in the middle of a road, hanging off a traffic bollard, trying to take a picture of like the Duke of York, that would be me. Because everybody was really British about it. Not once did somebody say, excuse me, why are you taking a photograph of that Abbey National on the Western Road? Even though they're all looking. And of course, if they'd asked me, I'd have said, well actually, that was where the great inventor Magnus Volk was born. But nobody ever got to ask me that. They just thought, it's almost cranky women. The new Encyclopedia of Brighton is alphabetically ordered, as was the original. It starts with Abattoirs, which you might think is odd for such a vegetarian town, and it ends with Zap Club. We did have an awful lot of abattoirs in this town, over 50 at one point, and most of them were in deeply residential areas, and there was no mains drainage or clean water, so you can imagine what a nice smelling place that was. Then between those bookend sections are scores of new sections that reflect not only the last 20 years of the town's history, but also aspects of its rich and diverse social history and culture not covered in the 1990 edition or indeed in many of the other books about Brighton. You'll also find spread throughout the text numerous, I thought, amazing pull-out quotes and facts dating back as far as the early 18th century. And I think they vividly demonstrate what an exceptional history the town has. And just to give you a couple of little examples, they're all in the book. Charles Dickens, for instance, said, I don't in the abstract approve of Brighton. I couldn't pass an autumn here, but it is a gay place for a week or so. Another writer, John Osborne, in 1982, said, Brighton is like nowhere else. Whenever I have lunch in Brighton, I always want to take someone to bed in the afternoon. I haven't all felt that. And he said, if I were to choose a way to die, it would be after a drunken, fishy tea day ending up at the end of the Palace Pier. I think you almost managed that. Another writer, S.P.B. May, said, anyone who does not live in Brighton must be mad and should be locked up. Another writer, D.H. Lawrence, in 1909, said, Brighton is stately, and I am not. So I push my way through the wind, and here I am at Rottingdean. Sorry, but it wasn't Rottingdean. Yes, here we are. Lord Alfred Douglas, who lived in Hyde for many years, in 1940, says, I noticed that in the long run, nearly everyone ends by coming to live and die in Brighton. Which is true, actually. There's a lot of people I found that came here for their health and ended up dying in hotels and things. So a few facts. Again, you may know some of these, but you may not. The Royal Pavilion is the only royal palace in Britain that isn't owned by the state or by the Crown. The first ever edition of the Yellow Pages was a section in the 1966 Brighton Telephone Directory. Canon John Hester, who was Vicar of Brighton from 1975 to 1985, was previously the rector of Soho, a parish that included film studios, theatres, numerous pawn shops, and 50 strip clubs. It's slightly different when we came here. According to the 2001 census, the religion of 6,480 of the city's residents is Jedi. May the force be with them always. In 1960, there were only 2,853 private cars in Brighton. And even though it's very traffic-laden now, as you know, we still have the lowest level of car ownership in the whole of the South East. So I think it's all those visitors coming with their car. And in 1865, Henry Fawcett was elected Liberal MP for Brighton, and he was the first ever blind member of Parliament. So that just gives you a sort of rough taster of amazing things about this town. Now, I don't think it's any great secret. I love the CMP area, and I love this festival in particular. I think this is the second or third time I've lived here. But I'll tell you, it is a coincidence that so many of the new profiles of people in the book do happen to be former residents of this area. It just, you know, it's a very, very incredible area. And they were born here or lived here at some point. And I think each in their own way, they highlight particular aspects of Brighton's rich history. And again, some of them you may have heard of, some of them not. There was a writer called Hector Belitho, and just to quote a little bit, this prolific New Zealand-born writer was not destined for a dull life. His father was a hairdresser who in 1898 designed and printed the world's first airmail stamps for a pigeon carrier letter service operating between Auckland and the Great Barrier Island, and his grandmother was an interpreter between the English and Maori leaders. The Times said of him, while in no sense one of the leading literary figures of the day, he was a writer who had the gift of choosing interesting subjects for his biographies and the power of writing about them in such a way as to arouse interest. He did have an absolutely fantastic life, served in the armed forces, but decided to leave New Zealand because he found it deeply homophobic. And as an out-game man, it wasn't a great atmosphere to be in. And he came to England, it was Australia originally, then he came to England. In 1926, from 1926, he spent an incredible 8 years at Windsor Castle, editing the letters of Lady Augusta Stanley. And she was only Queen Victoria's lady in waiting, but that was 8 years with suffer. And incredibly, Belitho was nearly expelled from the castle by George V because he had the temerity to contract German measles, which is a bit rich. But he wrote several royal biographies, including the best-selling Albert the Good, Prince Albert. And in 1934, Belitho worked with Terence Rattigan, fellow Brighton resident, on the play Grey Farm. In 1836, he was chosen as the official biographer of Rudyard Kipling, who, as I'm sure you'll know, used to live in Rottingdean. But he pulled out of the project because the family had a lot of restrictions on him, and he wanted to be, you know, quite forthright. But then he wrote quite a critical biography of King Edward VIII in 1837, which just came out 3 months after the official abdication. So you see, he had a very rich, varied life. And in 1949, he met Captain Derek Peel, and the two men began a lifelong relationship, and they lived together at 1 Nicholas Road from 1956. And sadly, about 10 years later, Belitho suffered a number of crippling strokes. And Derek Peel had to take over some of his writing, including an uncredited co-writer on Robbie Maugham's Sunset North Lawns. Belitho dying at Lee House Nursing Home, 61 Dyke Road, which is now Lee's House, the office block. It was once a nursing home, and he was cremated at Downs Crematorium. And unfortunately, after Hector died, Derek Peel sort of sank into the bottle, and he died in their home on April 28, 1979. Now, one of the most interesting residents who was here was a temporary resident, but it's a lady called Sarah Forbes Bonetta. Have you heard of her? Yeah, one or two. Well, I'm just going to read you some of the profile of her, because in 1850 there was an anti-slavery captain called Captain Frederick Forbes, and he was on the ship the HMS Bonetta, and he was in West Africa. And during his visit, he saw a young girl, aged about 8 years old, who was about to be ritually murdered in a ceremony called Watering of the Graves. And he ascertained that this girl was a princess from a neighbouring tribe, and that her parents had been massacred by the tribe. And he said, "It is usual to reserve the best born for the high behest of royalty and the immolation on the tombs of the diseased nobility. For one of these ends, she has been detained at court for 2 years, proving by her not having been sold to slave dealers that she was of good family. Well, Forbes couldn't bear to see this massacre happening, so he got the king to agree to actually give the girl to Queen Victoria as a present, as a sort of tribute. And he said that she would be a present from the King of the Blacks to the Queen of the Whites. And she was called Sarah Forbes Burnetta after him and after the ship. And she lived with Captain Forbes and his family, and then she was presented to the royal family in 1850, and her education and upkeep were paid for personally by Queen Victoria. And she became her goddaughter. And Forbes wrote, "She's a perfect genius. She now speaks English well and has a great talent for music. She has won the affections of all who have known her. She is far in advance of any white child of her age in atlas of learning and strength of mind and affection." Now, over the next few years, it was a bit of to and fro. Sarah went to live in Sierra Leone, and then she went to live with a vicar in Gillingham. And then eventually in Sierra Leone, she met a widowed former slave called James Pinson Labulo Davis. And he became a prosperous merchant in Lagos. And he wanted to marry Sarah. And at that point, he was living at 9 Victoria Road, very, very local. And obviously Queen Victoria took a great interest in what was going to happen to this girl. And after a number of discussions in 1862, it was decided that to prepare for her wedding, she should be sent to live with a Mr. and Mrs. Welsh, who lived here. She wasn't too pleased at having to leave her friends in Gillingham, and she described the Welsh's home, 17 Clifton Hill, as a desolate little pigsty, which I'm sure it isn't now. I don't know if people are here now. But there she stayed, and she prepared for her wedding. And on August 16, 1862, she and Davis were married at St Nicholas's Church, and in the book, this. There we are. That was in, I think it's illustrated on the news, and that's at St Nicholas Church, and that's the wedding. And you can see how many bridesmaids and guests there were. And what was unusual about this wedding is that it was probably the largest gathering of black people in Brighton that had been who weren't slaves. These were all freedmen and women. So it's quite amazing that actually happened. And there they are, and you can see how packed it was. It was right upstairs. And it made the fashionable papers. According to the Brighton Gazette, the guests included white ladies with African gentlemen, the guests African ladies with white gentlemen until all the space was filled. The bridesmaids, Davis's sisters, were 16 in number. I'm sure we can count them all. 16 bridesmaids. It was a big wedding. Captain Forbes' brother gave Sarah away, and the service was conducted by the Lord Bishop of Sierra Leone. They had a wedding breakfast at West Hill Lodge before the bride and groom left for London en route to Sierra Leone. They originally had 3 children, and the eldest child also became Queen Victoria's goddaughter, and she was particularly fond of her. They ended up, Davis's living in Madeira, which is where sadly Sarah died of tuberculosis in 1880, and she was actually buried she was asked to be buried at sea, but was actually buried on the island there. So, as I say, this was a big story. I mean, and hundreds of people came out to see this wedding. It was very, very big news. And as I say, what made it so unusual at the time that it was free black people in Brighton. So that was Sarah Forbes Burnetta. Now, of course, I've talked about this chap before, so I'll just touch on it briefly, because one of the great characters of this area was Gilbert Harvey. I'm sure some of you encountered him. He lived at 20 Montpellier Villas and became a huge TV star by accident, mostly because of his bad temper, on the panel show What's My Line. And as another Brighton resident, the writer John Montgomery, said that in the 1950s, many, many conversations on trains and in offices began with the question, did you see Gilbert Harding on What's My Line? And I think it really was a hugely popular show. And Gilbert enjoyed the company of many of his gay male neighbours in Brighton, who included Alan Melville, Robin Warne and Hector Belifo. And with Hector, they shared the same doctor, hairdresser and cab firm. So you can imagine the terms of those cat stories. I've got Gilbert Harvey and Hector Belifo in the back of my head. Anyway, Gilbert died in 1960, and 20 Montpellier Villas was actually sold at auction for near £10,000. I currently believe how much it would be worth now. Now, obviously, one of his great buddies was Robin Moore. There we are. After enjoying this, another little drink. This was actually lent to me by Peter, and it's a not untypical pose, I think, of Robin. And he had several homes in Brighton, and you know, he did hang around with Gilbert a lot. On one famous occasion, the two men embarked on a chauffeur-driven pub crawl around Brighton in Robin's Bentley, which was called Bessie. And it began at 6 p.m. and ended 12 hours later in Gilbert Harvey's kitchen, where they polished off the last few bottles from a crate of beer. Moor's first home in Brighton was actually a rented flat in Brunswick Terrace, and one of the previous tenants there had been Ivor Novello's boyfriend, Robert Andrews. And Moore had hosted many celebrity lunches there with, again, other Brighton residents like Dane Flores and Terence Rattigan and Villiers. But also Graham Greene and Donaldson and people like that would come. His next home was a house in Bute Street, and then his final home was in 550 Road. He died at the Royal Sussex Kensington Hospital after many years of self-indulgent, basically. And he was buried with his parents at Hartfield in Sussex. And there was a little bit of scandal, called scandal in 1991, when all but 6 volumes of his diaries was mysteriously stolen from his solicitor's office, where his executives have been keeping them, placing for safekeeping. And there's all sorts of apocryphal stories about, you know, that people were worried that there was sort of intelligent secrets in those diaries, but I rather suspect they were more indiscreet about certain public people's sexual proclivities, really. Now, one of the famous residents of this area, briefly, was Thomas Reed Kemp. And as I described him, he was the man who had everything, but ended his life with virtually nothing. You know, he basically did boom and bust. I mean, Thomas Reed Kemp was classic for doing that. But he did pay for the creation of most of what we now know as Kemp Town. And he did have built for himself the building known as the Temple off Montpellier Road, which is where Brighton and Hove Girls' School now is. But it was an incredible boom and bust thing. And a lot of the buildings were obviously built by Wilds and Busby, both Wilds and Busby. And with also Thomas Cubitt. And although there's the estate that bears his name and the Bristol Public House and various things, I mean, he left the town, but he actually ran away from the town. I mean, creditors were after him. He had to run away. There was a notice placed on St Nicholas's Church, basically calling for him to be arrested on sight, and he had to flee to Paris, where he died in poverty, and was buried somewhere in Père Lachaise Cemetery. And I know various local historians have tried to find the grave, but of course it won't be one of those great ornamental tombs. It will be a very obscure one, if anybody can find it. So if anybody finds that, do let me know, because I've had a look there as well, and I'm not been able to find it. And it's quite interesting that there was an obituary of him in the Gentleman's Magazine, which said, Mr. Kemp was ruined by his gigantic speculation, though now the property must be of immense value. Well, you know it is. So unfortunately, he didn't live long enough to see that. Now, there was an amazing coincidence, because when I was preparing this book and deciding who was going to be in it, I had no idea that CMP Festival was going to include an event about Alan Melville, whose centenary it is. So I was absolutely delighted when I decided to put the profile of him in it. And he was a Scottish-born writer, review author, a playwright, radio personality and lyricist. And he came to my attention, it's amazing all these books intertwine, but he came to my attention when I was researching my biography of Coral Brown, because they were good friends. And although he'd written very many successful reviews, he called Sweet and Lower, sounds like a diet pill, and Sweetest and Lowest, which himself ran for nearly 800 performances. Coral actually encouraged him to try his hand at straight drama. And didn't quite go as they planned, because his first pitch for mainstream success was a play called Jonathan, which was a very curious reworking of the Old Testament tale about the relationship between the eponymous hero and his beloved friend David. But it proved to be a disaster of biblical proportions, as Melville admitted. I don't think it helped much in 1948 to suggest that David was kinky for Jonathan. Perfectly true, of course, but in 1948 that sort of thing just wasn't done. So it didn't go down too well at all. But he also wrote again for Coral and her then fiancé Jack Buchanan. They wrote the successful comedy Castle in the Air, which was a real smash hit. These other hits included Spring in Park Lane and Simon and Laura, which again coming full circle, when they made the film version, Gilbert Harvey made a cameo appearance as himself. So all these people, it's incredible the way they link up. And Alan moved to Brighton in 1951, and he first lived at 17 Clifton Terrace, and then he moved to 28 Victoria Street until he died in 1983. So it was wonderful to see him actually celebrated in this festival. Another famous former, resident who was born here, 1 Montpellier Terrace, was the world-famous band leader and composer Ray Noble. If you don't know the name, you'll know his ballads, which included The Very Thought of You, Good Night Sweetheart, and Love is the Sweetest Thing. Basically, most of Ray's career was in Hollywood, and he led the legendary Rainbow Room Orchestra, which included on trombone one Glenn Miller. So very big news indeed. And he died in 1978. He eventually came back to England for visits, but his career was mostly in Hollywood. So that's just a few. Oh no, a couple more. It's not just people that lived here. We've also got some amazing people who are buried here as well. In St Nicholas's churchyard, you might not know, is the tomb of a chap called Nicholas Tettersall. Nicholas Tettersall, what did he do? Well, he helped Charles II escape after the Battle of Worcester, and it was his boat that Charles was ferried to France to escape Cromwell. There he is. That's his tomb in St Nicholas's churchyard. It's quite near the entry, and the inscription is very faded, but they have actually put a laminated history up there of what he did. We think this is true, but basically when Tettersall found out who his passenger was going to be, he doubled the fee. Figured that the king could pay extra. It was originally for £60. No, in fact he more than doubled it to 200. And anyway, they left shore and harbour and in a boat called the Surprise. It was quite a surprise. Afterwards, Tettersall changed his name to the Royal Escape, and he clearly wasn't scared of Cromwell finding out. And obviously, after Charles II came back and took the throne, he was granted a pension of £100 a year for 99 years. No small sum. And with that wealth, in 1861, he bought the Old Ship Hotel. And he also became the town's High Constable for a year. And it was a bit of a nasty piece of work when he did that, because he hated all nonconformists, including Quakers, and persecuted them relentlessly. So it's got a very dubious history, Mr. Tettersall, but there he is, he's buried in St Nicholas Church. And it is, we think it is the oldest grave in that churchyard. So, the other notable graves, Martha Gunn is up there, Queen of the Dippers. There she is. Quite a large lady, and she needed to be for her job, because if you don't know what dippers were, I'm sure most of you do, when Brighton became the great raving spa resort, the genteel ladies used to get in these bathing huts, and they would be led into the water by great strapping dippers like that, and they'd be helped into the water and helped to swim and bathe and all the rest of it. And Martha's family were fisher folk, basically. The descendants include the Guns florist, which still exists today, now in North Lane. So she was, she's quite a big lady for doing that sort of thing. Who else is buried in St Nicholas's churchyard? He's one of its oldest ever residents, Sheikh Dean Mohammed. That's not him. First time I've used this picture. Bear with me. There he is. Splendid. That wasn't a day wear, by the way. This is a film, I think. Sheikh Dean Mohammed, just briefly to tell you a little bit about him. He was the first Indian ever to have a book published in English. He opened Britain's first curry house, the Hindustani coffee house in London's West End, and then he came down here and became what was known as shampooing surgeon to royalty. I mean, it wasn't shampooing, it was a form of sort of Indian massage and Turkish bath. But he got royal patronage. He was a very good PR man, Sheikh Dean Mohammed. Not a terribly good businessman because he got bought out eventually. But he had the patronage of George IV and then William IV. And all the great and the good came down, and they all went to Sheikh Dean Mohammed. And he died, he was over 100 years old when he died, and he is buried in that part of St Nicholas's Church that you can't get into. It's gated off, but the tombstone is there, and his family. And his son and grandson, both called Frederick, went on to become actually well-known surgeons in various forms. So quite an amazing family. And now something you might recognise just by the shell motif there, that this is the grave in St Nicholas. This is of Eamon Wilde. Eamon Wilde, father of Eamon Henry Wilde. Well, goodness me, I mean, you see examples of his architecture everywhere from Kemp Town, and but there he is. They think that actually the tombstone was designed by Eamon Henry Wilde for his father. And it's a bit strange that, because the tombstone is straight and the railings have got going diagonally. But that's to the west, to the east of Martha Gunn's tomb down here a little bit. So you've really got the great and the good buried up at St Nicholas's. And of course eventually when that got full up, the great and the good went to the extramural cemetery. Now, apart from sort of profiles of people, there are actually some parts of the history of this area which you might not know, because this is 7 Victoria Road. I don't know if anybody here lives there at the moment, but basically this was the starting place for what is now Brighton Lesbian Gay Switchboard, which started on April the 26th, 1975, and it's called the Brighton Lavender line, which I always thought sounded like a railway. But it was a gay counselling helpline, and it was run by 4 men and 2 women volunteers. And at that point, this was the open cafe, and it was a kind of a centre for lots of sort of alternative cultures. Then it became Green's Vegetarian Restaurant, and then Crike's Crate Restaurant, which is how I remember it. It became Brighton Gay Switchboard in 1977 and merged with Brighton Icebreakers. And it moved to the United Reformed Church, Queen's Square, which isn't there anymore. And it's now in Bartholomew's, and it currently receives over 5,000 calls a year. And the website has 80,000 visitors per year. And that's basically where it was started. Anybody remember its Cripes? Yeah? And Greens? No? They're so good, yeah. Chat about Cripes, oh, there was also a lesbian newsletter started there as well, so it was quite an amazing place. And also, who remembers Brighton Voice? Yeah? Because this was a sort of underground, collectively run paper. It started in March 1973. It was founded by Roy Carhill and George Wilson in Hove. And eventually they started having collective meetings at the open cafes. You see, it all happened there. And the paper's content followed some broadly anarcho-socialist principles, and it covered housing, gay rights, civil liberties, environment, unemployment, anti-racism, fascism, and women's rights. And the paper was actually typed and laid out in the basement of that building. And distribution was the main problem for the paper, because a lot of newspapers were reluctant to stock it because sometimes they were worried about getting legal action because of its contents. Some of those are a shame, but you won't be surprised to know that it sold really well on the University of Sussex campus. Now, notable members of the collective include Steve Basson, who later became council leader, and then Lord Basson, and then the journalist Duncan Campbell, not the Guardian Duncan Campbell, the New Statesman Duncan Campbell, and Val Hennessy, who now writes for the Daily Mail. So it was a lot happened in there, absolutely amazing. So you see, this is an amazing historical area, which is why I'm so pleased to be able to sort of come and do this talk today. As I say, there are sort of over 200 new sections in the book, and we've got sections on gay Brighton, green Brighton, foodie Brighton, housing, all sorts of things. Shops past and present, which I have to say is one of my favourites to do. So that's something for nostalgia freaks and also for people that want to know what's going on in the town now. As I say, there's a lot more profiles of personalities who were in entertainment, business, literary figures. There's also things like films and TV programmes made in Brighton, works of fiction that mention Brighton, and also authors that lived here and worked here. So I hope there's something for everybody. There's even, as I started with Abattoirs, and we've even got sections of sewers and waterworks, and toilets, public toilets, which you'll see when you see the book. I mean, I hope there's something for everybody. I feel there is. That's the feedback I'm getting. It is very exciting for me personally, because the book came out just over 3 weeks ago, and it's proved so popular that we've already had to order a reprint. It's literally flying off the shelves, which is, makes me feel like I've done something right. And it's been a great pleasure to work on it. And although Peter claims that I might know perhaps more than he does, of course, it's not all in there. I hope it's in the book, and there is something there too. That even for those who were born and raised here, maybe if there's one thing in there that you didn't know, I know I've done my job properly. Just to finish, the architect and designer George Aitchison, he once said, the more one tries to probe into the mind of Brighton, the more do her secrets multiply. And I know that's true. And for anyone trying to do a book like this, it's almost a thankless task, because for every secret that you do unveil, there's going to be another one lying there somewhere. But it's been fantastic, it's been a challenge, it's been a delight. And it reminded me, and I hope it reminds other people as well, if we needed a reminder, of Brighton's unique character. It's entrancing, eccentric, frustrating sometimes, rewarding, contrasting, surprising and predictable, elegant and gaudy, mercurial and mesmeric, and long may it remain so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rose, for being so diverting and ladylike. I think glass from that bottle.
I can't use your glass, it's got wine in it.
Don't be ridiculous. We're sharing this mic. If anyone would like to ask questions of Rose, please stand up and project.
So other people can hear.
Right, Siamese twins at the mic?
I think so. Yes, sir. Sorry, I can't really hear you very well. Can you just, that's it, lovely. Right. 20 years probably.
book of reference when we describe houses. And, you know, all the authors that we love and buy, not sure, but really, and we could be given some newly almost this title for what he did, which was rather than such a cool. He was just a student. He was given a grant, thousands of it, and then went to Brighton District Centre, where he sat for about 2 or 3 months. And Burton
Right. Right, gentleman was just asking about Tim Carden, saying he should have been given an honour or something for what he did. I'm not sure if he was a student. I think he'd been made redundant, so he had time on his hand, but I think he did get a small grant to do it. What happened was, when Brighton Libraries decided that they wanted to do this new edition, Tim was asked if he wanted to do the update, and he said he didn't, he moved on. But he's a big Brighton and Hove Albion fan, and I think he's done a couple of books about that, and he's doing a website, and I think he's trying to get a Brighton and Hove Albion museum set up at the new Falmouth Stadium, or annex, as we should call it now. So he didn't want to do it, but he was perfectly happy for someone else to do that. So basically what you've got the best. You've got, about 95% of what he did is in this book, and it's been updated, and he's done corrections, and so that's been his involvement in it, basically. And I don't know about honours, that's not up to me, but he does get royalties from this new edition, you'll be pleased to hear, so at least he'll get some financial recognition.
Any more questions? Ladies, front.
I always wondered why they can't get into part of St. Nicholas Church. Do you know why? And why it's that fitting?
I think it's because
Sorry, I wonder why you can't get into...
Lady's saying why we can't get into some of the St Nicholas's churchyard. I don't actually know, to be honest with you. I know that there are some of the oldest graves around there, certainly Sheikh D. Mohammed's and things like that. I don't actually know, to be honest with you. I don't think they even open it on open days. And also, you know how dangerous that churchyard is. The sort of graves collapsing and things like that. So,
apparently it's because that section I asked, because I want to get in,
yeah.
is near the entrance to the church vaults. So they...
Right. So it could be a health and safety, maybe.
Anyone else?
The first volume is much loved prayer, and after using it for 20 years, was it disintegrated? Is there any way that you can persuade the company to issue your volume in half so that over the next 20, 30 years,
Okay, gentleman's asking if there would be a hardback edition. We could have done a hardback edition and it would have doubled the price virtually. And that's why it's in paperback. I mean, it is a much better, it's higher quality paper, and it's in higher quality. I mean, I don't know if you've seen it or touched it, but it is much higher quality. That's going to last a lot longer than the other one did. But to be honest, it's the same reason why people said, why didn't you do colour photographs? You start getting into colour, you start getting into hardback, you're pushing up the price, and we wanted to make it as accessible to many people as possible. So people will, £20 okay, but once you start getting into 30, they're going to think twice about doing it. But as I say, the quality of the paper is much, much, much better. So fingers crossed it will last.
Is there anyone else? Inga?
Inga's asking what was my least favourite and my most favourite. Oh gosh, that's a bit asking a parent what their favourite child is. I'll tell you what the least favourite was housing. Not because it was the most difficult, because it gave me a headache, really. It was so depressing. I felt like a housing officer. It was insoluble. Because the housing problem in Brighton, there's always been a housing problem. Ever since the Great Village started coming down here and building houses and renting them out, we had social commentators at the time saying, goodness gracious me, I could go and live in Paris for a year on what it would cost to rent a house in Brighton for a month. So there was always that housing problem, and it kept escalating and escalating. And social housing and private housing, and everybody's tried different things to to remedy it, and it's all failed. And you know, one of the facts that jumped out at me was, I mean, you know, it's a no-brainer, as the young people say. Since 1980, there are 5,000 council homes in Brighton and Hove sold, and there are now 11,000 people on the waiting list. Kind of go together a little bit. So that was that had me pulling my hair. I had to stop it when I was writing it, and I just thought, God, this is depressing. And I'd say I did feel like a housing officer trying to solve it. So that gave me a bit of a headache. I love them all, really. I mean, there's obviously some that are more tragic in tone, but there are some of those that I'm particularly proud of. For instance, the entry on Maria Colwell. I was particularly proud of that piece of writing, and I felt it was a case that happened here tragically, but it changed the nation's. It raised awareness of child abuse and neglect, and it changed the law and it changed social policy. And as I say, the tragedy was that little girl's life being lost almost certainly saved others. Not as many as we'd like, obviously, because it still goes on. But it was absolutely tragic. The little Brighton girl had to lose her life for people to become aware of that, and for the law to change and social services to change. So although I call it a favourite, but I was particularly proud of that. I was particularly pleased to do put things like Gay Brighton and Black Brighton and Jewish Brighton in particular. I mean, the Jewish Brighton is one of the biggest sections, and rightly so, because Brighton's Jewish history is almost as old as the town itself, basically. And also the shops past and present, that was a lot of fun. You know, and again, things that jump out of that, we've lost an awful lot of our independent record shops, and a lot of our independent bookshops, even in the 13 years since I lived here. But happily, we still have City Books, who've been incredibly supportive to this volume. And it was fun bringing it up to date, things like Green Brighton and that sort of thing. Foodie Brighton was a lot of fun, because we've got now more eateries anywhere else except London in the UK, where it's only 253,000, which is not bad at all. And we've been absolutely interested in our food since George IV hired France's top chef to come and cook for him for a year. And I think that sort of set the standard, really, because this guy could cook 60 dishes at one sitting and that sort of thing. So obviously some have been a bit more bisty or whatever, but it's just been a joy to research. As I said to somebody, it's been like sort of all my 25 years of journalism almost in one book, because every entry was different, the tone had to be slightly different, the content was different, even the methods of research had to be different. So it's just been a blast doing it. I mean, it was a very intense year. But also the great thing for me was, because I've taken photographs professionally before, but the challenge was to take the photographs and to not just take the sort of the bog standard kind of photographs, really, to try and look for photographs that told a slightly different story. So I hope I've done that as well. And they will be for sale at some point. I'm getting a website up, so if anybody wants some of those new photographs, their website will be available very soon, rosecollis.com. Because and it was great as well. Digital, again, technology's moved on. It made a difference to the book, so we could keep updating it and correcting it right up until it went to print. But also with the digital photography, I mean, my camera does beautiful black and white photographs. So it keeps the costs down, and it makes everything a lot easier to do. So yeah, I've had a blast.
Rose, even more foodie, do you bring in the vegetarian aspects as a fellow vegetarian?
Do I bring in the vegetarian aspects? Yeah. Well, yes. Yeah, I talk about the town's first vegetarian restaurant, which was not Food Friends, and it wasn't Terra Terra, but yes, certainly past and present. And also in Green Brighton as well, because I talk about sort of community gardens and we're a very organic town and things like that, and community allotments and stuff like that. So it's
Lady here, Rose.
Is it factual fiction that the second largest population here is Chinese?
No, it's I can't remember the exact figure, but I haven't got the book in front of me, so I can't quote you. But if you look in Black Brighton, there's what I've done is quoted the statistics from the last census, the 2001 census. So I can't remember off the top of my head what the figure is. I don't know fact or fiction, but the figures are in the book. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's not still all in there. It's in the book. But as I say, if you look under Black Brighton, and when I talk about Black Brighton, I've used the Black History Group and Mosaics definition of Black Brighton, which is basically non-white, so it's black, Asian, Chinese, whatever. So.
I'm told there's nothing about home in this one. Will home be getting looking?
Where is Hove? Right, okay. There's a little section called Hove actually, just a very little section. But this was always the Brighton, the Encyclopedia of Brighton, and there is in fact an Encyclopedia of Hove, which was done by Judy Middleton. Now it's not done in a book form like that. It's either, is it 15 volumes? Right. Oh dear. Right. Right. So it's Encyclopedia of Hove and Portslade, I think, isn't it? Yeah, 15 volumes, which City Books still sell. You can also see reference copies at certainly Jubilee Library, and I think Hove Library, and I think the History Centre, and maybe some of the other local libraries will have it as well. So, and I mean, I think that's absolutely right. Hove and Portslade should have its own encyclopedia, because just because we were unified, that doesn't mean it's lost its identity and it hasn't lost its history. So I'm absolutely happy that it should have its own separate one. And obviously, I mean, you know, if you try to unite those two together, you're going to end up with a book this big. So yes, so if you want, it's spiraled around volumes, so it's a little bit on the flimsy side. But again, I think it is A to Z, and yeah, it covers Hove and Portslade.
Well, Rose's Encyclopedia is on sale for hard cash or hard plastic over there, along with tea and buns. We'll finish now. I'd like to thank Rose very much for a thoroughly enjoyable talk. Well done.
Thank you. It's not compulsory, but if you would like to buy a book and have me sign it, I'll be signing it. Thank you.
The unsigned ones are rare.
Well, I do, yeah.
On the other side of the road. Yeah. There's lots of people who get right stuff. Yeah.
don't know, I've heard nothing. The rights of the Gilberts, I'm sure about the separate contract. Again, it's got a whole list of it's all there.
Thanks very much for the other day. But nevertheless, they're not going to go upstairs. We were saying,
That's all right, no problem. I was a bit worried over it. Sure, it's in there. I thought to the world. I tried to say it. That's true.
Which is I'm going to process over there, yes. We'll try and be on time this time. We should be there by 4. But if you just actually sit back, taking down. Yeah, taste.
Takes it out.